Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The Tuesday edition on Bloomberg TV and radio. A gorgeous day here in Washington, even if it's a bit warm, kind of like the core inflation reading this morning. But we're watching shares of Nvidia and AMD just like we were at this time yesterday. And nobody could seem to care less about the news from China. They both closed higher yesterday after the 15% story ran. Remember, they would agree to give 15% of revenues from sales of AI chips to China to the U.S. government. Not a thing. Now today we hear the opposite. China's turning course. Stocks are still higher. And it comes against the backdrop of a trade truce, if we can actually call it that, because there are some tariffs in place that the president has continued here with Beijing just yesterday, which would have been the deadline. We got another 90 days, suggesting there could be more time to reach a deal and maybe exercise more deals like these with the chip makers. This is where we want to start our conversation with a familiar guest. Nazak Khaktar is with us today, National Security Practice Group leader at Wiley and a voice of experience, as I say, in being a former Assistant Secretary for Industry and Analysis at the International Trade Administration. Great to see you, Nazak. Thanks for coming in.
Wonderful to be back.
So let's start big picture here. We just bought ourselves another 90 days. Is that enough to actually create a trade deal, or is it just simply an indication that talks are continuing?
You know, it's pretty much an indication of talks are continuing. Trade deals, especially if they're going to be comprehensive, they're incredibly complex. Mm-hmm. They cover different sectors. They cover different measures with respect to goods within sectors. Mm-hmm. So 90 days is really an indication of let's continue talks. At the end of the day, I think the consensus is we're probably going to get a very narrow trade deal with China, but really the goal and all eyes are getting some kind of trade deal.
Okay. Does it rely on the president getting in the room with President Xi?
I think at the end of the day, probably these trade deals also have, especially based on which each country is asking for. We're asking for magnets. They're asking for chips. These materials have incredible geopolitical consequences. There's sectors of the economy, really critical sectors of the U.S. economy, that are still not getting magnets that they need from China. And so this isn't going to be resolved unless both country leaders get in a room and hash out what they need from each other. Yes.
Well, it sounds like it. The president had said at one point that we've got a deal up front. The term he used was upfront providing of rare earths, the batteries that are needed for these critical components. But we're getting a sense that did not happen exactly the way he wanted.
No, I mean, China has repeatedly said, you'll get it. But China operates on its own time. Okay. And just because you get a few doesn't mean all the sectors that were previously getting it from China, for all the end-use applications, are going to get it. Yes, will our auto OEMs get some of the things they need? Absolutely. Yep. But we've got still issues with our defense primes that are not getting things. Industrial applications, they're not getting the magnets for their motors. At the end of the day, China is slow walking it, and they're playing games.
Well, you just said it. OEMs are one thing. National security, defense is another. Does that suggest that China has the leverage?
China has a considerable amount of leverage. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've been trying to sort of educate the community about is that, look, we are making enormous, the United States, correctly so, in critical minerals production and magnet production. We're going to need till 2028 to scale what the U.S. government is heavily investing in. So we really have about 2 years to solve for. And what I've been trying to socialize with the White House is, magnets can be refurbished. There are a lot of countries that use magnets that discard them at the end of the day. Yes. And this isn't recycling, but we can recover magnets.
How are you trying to socialize that with the White House?
I mean, it's just education, talking to them about it, talking to them about options. Absolutely. Just a few weeks ago, they had a summit to discuss this with key stakeholders. Mm-hmm. It's resonating. There's companies who've come in, raised their hand, and said, we're happy to do this for you, White House, if push comes to shove. So the point is really making sure that we have a strategy in place, and whether we're going to basically cave to China anymore based on the fact that we're not as vulnerable as we think we are.
Well, I'd love to hear your insights on what's happened in the last 24 hours. A big olive branch to the other side of the world, rebuffed by Beijing. And this is, we could talk about a lot of elements. I'd love your take on this deal that Nvidia and AMD made as well to actually give a chunk of proceeds from China sales to the U.S. government. But that was the concern yesterday. Now the concern is, are they going to buy it at all? Beijing is telling Chinese companies, don't buy Nvidia, don't buy AMD. And this whole arrangement is something that we talked about last evening with Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat from Illinois, important as he's ranking member on the House China Select Committee. Here's his take on what we're discussing right now.
He declared our national securities for sale. It's a disastrous dereliction of duty. The first thing that the commander-in-chief and the president needs to do is to protect our country. And so when he basically says that our national securities for sale, that our crown jewels can be obtained through some kind of revenue sharing agreement with the United States government, that is a horrible sign to our adversaries. What are we going to do next? Sell aircraft carriers to the Chinese and the government takes a 20% cut? This is horrible. We should not be engaged in the sale of these H20 chips to the CCP. And the fact that he would even broach the topic of these Blackwell processors potentially being for sale to the Chinese means that they're salivating at the prospect of basically taking those chips, inserting them into their military systems, which would be used against us and our allies, friends, and partners in the Indo-Pacific, and then also used against various minorities in perpetration of human rights abuses. So this is a really, really dark day for our national security.
All right, he just said a lot. So let's unpack a little bit of this. With regard to the arrangement that the White House gets or the government gets a 15% take, these licenses have just been approved, and there is an air of whether these were bought and paid for, and whether we're compromising. You just heard the congressman say our national security. How do you respond to that?
I think, first and foremost, what's really important for folks to understand is that when we license chips, we're also licensing the technology, the know-how that goes with it, right? Mm-hmm. So when on one hand, folks are saying, well, these are sort of the lower grade chips. Yeah. These are still exquisite chips. China has huge market access barriers against the United States. Yeah. If it can indigenize it, it doesn't want it from us. Uh-huh. If it wants it from us, there's a strategic need for it, right? Sure, right. So the transfer of know-how, to me, I think we've got to be very careful about.
Because Huawei has developed a similar chip to the H2.
China's entire semiconductor industry and the industry which is powering their defense capabilities, mm-hmm. their military capabilities that they're using right now offensively to terrorize our allies, and also aid and abet the Russians in Iran. That has been built, make no mistake, on U.S. technology that we transfer to China. Mm-hmm. So there are cumulative risks there. But in terms of the 15%, your question, I think this is really in the domain of Congress to decide whether they want these types of transactions to allow the U.S. government to collect revenue. I think when you look at the laws, it seems a little bit the laws are silent on this kind of issue. I think different folks had different interpretations. On one hand, the government can't collect revenue unless Congress authorizes it. On the other hand, they haven't explicitly banned it. So it's really up to Congress to say whether this is permissible or not. But certainly, do we want the National Security Bureau to potentially make money off of sales? Depending on how they use it and depending on how they're exercising judgment, these are all open questions.
Well, I guess so. You wonder if Beijing makes these even more sought after by making them taboo in the process. But in our remaining moment, Nazak, does all this noise that we're talking about right now give you an indication that a trade deal is more elusive, or that we're actually getting down to some business and might arrive at the finish line here with China?
The way that so I look at sort of China's behavior. Yeah. It's made commitments. It hasn't honored it. It makes commitments. It hasn't honored it. Mm-hmm. It is asking for more and more and more and not signaling. This is really important to watch. China is not signaling at all that it wants a deal. It's just playing with us. It's drawing down the timeline. I think China is also trying to make the president look bad during this process. Yeah. If I were to read China, and I've been doing China for 25 years, studying it, dealing with China and trade, national security, China doesn't want a deal. It's playing us, and it wants the public to see how they're playing us.
That doesn't sound like we're ever getting to a deal then. If China doesn't want a deal, there's no deal. if you're Jensen Huang, then you're going to China to try to make the sales pitch for your own chips all over again.
This is a chess game, arm move, counter move, but China's going to extract as much as it can from us without a deal. Absolutely.
I'm so happy you came in. I really appreciate the insights.
My pleasure.
Just the voice that we needed today from Nazak Nakakhtar Wiley. Many thanks for the insights, as always. I want to play this to the panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano have thoughts on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, of course, partner at Stonecourt Capital, Republican strategist. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. What's your thought on this, Rick? And boy, how quickly the news can change. We were talking yesterday about this new opening in the market for Nvidia and AMD. Investors felt good about it, even if they were losing 15%. Now China's telling Chinese companies not to buy American. How does this pan out in the end?
Well, it's a kind of a smart play on China's part, as Nazak was saying. They need to build their capability. Nothing builds it like demand. And I'm sure they're feeling vulnerable to manipulation of this market. If Donald Trump can bestow them with the gift of having these for sale in China, he can take it away. And the last thing the Chinese want to do is be at the beck and call of Donald Trump. So honestly, this is a game that's been going on for a long time. Investment from the U.S. investors into China tech has been fueling the Red Army buildup against us. And this is just another example of them taking us to the cleaners.
Taking us to the cleaners. Jeannie, was Nazak onto something? Are the Chinese just trying to embarrass Donald Trump or make him look bad?
I think sure, but I think they're more interested in ensuring their prominence in the economy and the world as we go forward. And, a lot of people are predicting we are facing a China shock 2.0, and it's going to come as a result of their long-term investments in these frontier economies. And they are doing a magnificent job growing in that area, which is why so many national security experts and others, but particularly as we think about national security, have been concerned about Donald Trump's decisions in many areas, particularly as it pertains to chips, but also as it pertains to alienating one of the United States' biggest strengths to combat China, which is our allies. The reality is we are far smaller in terms of a labor force than China. To confront China, we need the support of allies that make us stronger and bigger and better. And as opposed to confronting China, what he is doing is, for some reason, confronting our allies, Canada, Mexico, Switzerland. I mean, the list goes on and on. They turn away from us. It doesn't even matter if they turn to China, which some of them are looking at, but they rob us of an enormous strength. So, I think this is China doing what nations do and what the United States should be doing in this escalating confrontation and competition. But Donald Trump's decisions in many areas suggest that he doesn't quite get it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, as we consider the interactions of the two biggest economies in the world, we wonder if it's possible to gauge the status of the biggest economy, and that is ours. On this CPI day, Rick Davis, we have news from the President of the United States. There's a new leader of the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, remembering he fired the former commissioner about a week ago on Jobs Day when he did not like the numbers, and he thought that there was some political rigging. I think the rigged was the word that he used over and over again. The president has named E.J. Antoni to lead BLS, according to a Truce Social post, writing that he will ensure that the numbers released are honest and accurate. Knowing that Antoni has been very vocal about his concerns with BLS jobs data and revisions, and we'll get into some of the things that he has said, Rick, but a big part of the conversation in financial circles this morning was, can we trust the data? And when you're hearing questions like that on Wall Street, does it mean you've already lost? What do you think of this pick?
Yeah, this was not a pick that you will send a message to the Wall Street community that we're going to make sure these numbers are accurate, regardless of whether they're good or bad. This is a pick that says we'll never have a bad number as long as Donald Trump is going to be president of the United States. And that's something the Congress is going to have to really focus on in their confirmation hearing.
Mm-hmm. So, Jeannie, let's talk a little bit about what Mr. Antoni has said. his comments from a Fox Business News interview are making the rounds today, as he suggests that it would be wise to pause monthly jobs reports, monthly jobs readings over accuracy concerns, instead maybe updating the markets quarterly with jobs data to find more accurate numbers. Is that about to happen?
It absolutely could, if indeed he takes the position, is confirmed, and everything else. The reality is that the Bureau has problems, and the previous commissioner talked about those. Part of those deal with the cuts that they've experienced, the amount of funding they need to get an accurate count. And this is why, if the president was truly concerned about the quality of this data, he may not have fired her, but taken her suggestions and many others seriously. But he didn't do that because he doesn't like the data. He fires her and appoints the new commissioner. And the reality is it doesn't make anybody feel safe that these numbers that we're going to see are politically neutral. And that is a real problem, because let's not forget, states like the United States and all 50 states within it depend on accurate numbers, as do people, to make big decisions. If we can't trust the data are politically neutral, that is going to make decision making that much harder.
The quote from Fox Business: until it's corrected, referring to what he sees as corrupt data, the BLS should suspend issuing the monthly jobs reports, but keep publishing the more accurate, though less timely, quarterly data. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you for the analysis. Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts weighs in next, only here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We've got breaking news here. It's coming from the White House briefing room. Caroline Levitt is talking to reporters right now. There's a live look for you on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. We were just talking about this, the president's pick to run BLS, and his thoughts on what to do with the jobs data coming from that agency. EJ Antoni saying this was, by the way, before he was named to the job by President Trump. Until it is corrected, referring to problems with the data that, of course, led to the firing of the former BLS commissioner. He says, quote, the BLS should suspend issuing the monthly jobs reports, but keep publishing the more accurate, though less timely, quarterly data. He went on to add, major decision makers from Wall Street to D.C. rely on these numbers, and a lack of confidence in the data has far-reaching consequences. Well, some folks do have a lack of confidence in the data, which is how we got here. But the White House is not about to cancel monthly job reports. This is the news. Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, just now telling reporters the plan is for BLS to continue to put out jobs reports. That part won't change. The terminal just crossing that headline a moment ago. Also, headlines coming from Ukraine. President Zelensky met with reporters a bit earlier today, and it's giving us a little bit more information ahead of the summit on Friday in Alaska when President Trump sits down with Vladimir Putin. This is not going to be easy. Remembering that the idea floated for a truce would include freezing lines in place, effectively giving up the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass and Crimea, to Russia. That's what Vladimir Putin was calling for. Not that we even know that it would be in a final deal. President Zelensky sat down with reporters a short time ago saying no, he will not withdraw troops from the Donbass and will not give the Donetsk and Luhansk regions to Russia if it means unlocking a ceasefire. Here's the quote: for Russians, the Donbass is a bridgehead for a future new offensive. Any of territorial issues, he says, cannot be separated from security guarantees. It's where we start our conversation with Congressman Jake Auchincloss, the Democrat from Massachusetts. 4th District is with us now live on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you, Congressman, as a Marine combat veteran. I know you have very strong feelings about this. When you hear language like this from President Zelensky, it doesn't sound like we are any closer to a deal with Vladimir Putin. Why are we hosting him for peace talks this week?
Good afternoon, and good question. This public fracture underscores why it has been so critical for NATO and Ukraine to collectively define victory in the public imagination, as well as, most importantly, in the Ukrainian imagination. And I've been saying this for 2 years. I said it to Joe Biden. I'm saying it to Donald Trump. So it's not partisan. It's policy. We need to define victory. And that's 3 things. 1, it's a secure eastern border. 2, it's freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. And 3, it's Ukrainian accession to the European Union. You deliver those 3 things, you have a sovereign, prosperous, democratic Ukraine. That's a victory.
Okay. Does that sound like something that President Trump can accomplish on Friday?
No. What he could accomplish on Friday would be to issue an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin that Putin must release the kidnapped Ukrainian children as a good faith beginning to negotiations. There will be no deal in this summit. But Vladimir Putin's release of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped and held in captivity, held under false premises, would, I think, be a good faith marker towards what could be productive negotiations around that definition of victory.
Well, there have been a lot of questions about why we're the host nation here, beyond why these talks are even happening at all. Even in the pursuit of peace, typically there are agreements that are made. There's a framework before the 2 leaders sit down at the table, so you don't have any major surprises. The idea of having Vladimir Putin on American soil, presumably, and you can tell me if you know differently, on an American military base, this is going to be somewhere in Alaska, I don't know what the facility will be, has been compared with, for instance, yourself having served in Afghanistan, where you led an infantry patrol, almost like George W. Bush hosting Osama bin Laden for peace talks. Am I going too far with this, Congressman? How do you see it?
You're addressing what is Donald Trump's approach to most foreign policy issues, which is that he's all show horse, no workhorse. He doesn't want to actually do the hard work of mid-level and high-level negotiations between officials that would preface a principles-level meeting between the presidents. He doesn't want to do that work. He wants a photo op. He wants to wine and dine Vladimir Putin because he has always sought Vladimir Putin's approval. It's like this weird fanboy thing that he has. And nothing's going to come of it. And it's going to further erode America's geopolitical standing when we need to be spending that political capital on appropriating Russian frozen assets in Brussels and taking that 300 billion euros and sending it to Ukraine to strengthen their military-industrial complex, on getting Ukraine to join the European Union's Lisbon Treaty's collective defense article, on authorizing Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike Russia, on tightening oil price caps on Russian exports. All of these things that are geopolitically achievable but intensive, those are the hard work that Donald Trump is not doing that could have actually made a summit productive. Instead, it's going to be, yet another sizzle without the steak.
Well, he did at one point, I think, want to invite or suggested inviting the Taliban to Camp David. What should be the parameters then for this meeting? Should it be on a military base? Should these guys put 2 chairs out on the runway and talk this out? Because if it's nothing more than a photo op, why should he enjoy the hospitality of the United States?
Yeah, I'm not a protocol officer. I'm not getting into the details on that because it doesn't matter, because it's not going to actually achieve the outcomes that we want. The outcome that I want from this poorly conceived summit, the only achievable outcome here would be an ultimatum about releasing the kidnapped Ukrainian children as a beginning, not as a conclusion to negotiations.
Okay, that's a good answer. Congressman, I'd like to ask you, as a former member of the House China Select Committee, about some of the headlines we've been hearing about trade with China. The president has allowed another 90 days for talks to continue, and has now made an arrangement with Nvidia and AMD, 2 of the most important American companies, never mind important chip makers, to give 15% of their sales of AI chips to China to the U.S. government. It's been called unprecedented. I don't know if you see it that way. I don't know where the money is going. We haven't heard that either. But is that the cost of doing business?
My one question is, how many Trump meme coins does Nvidia's senior leadership own? Because that kind of deal is so grotesquely inappropriate and contrary, 1, to the interests of Nvidia, and 2, to American interests that I just have to question whether they're buying Trump coins on the side. Because we know that the Trump coin allows foreign officials and senior executives at corporations to buy influence with the president anonymously but securely. And I question whether they've bought those Trump coins, because this deal is hugely inappropriate. It basically makes the federal government a co-partner in helping China leapfrog us on AI.
Wow. You could also suggest that the government is now going to be invested in the chip industry. And you could also ask shareholders who bought stock in companies like Nvidia and AMD if they're comfortable with the government getting 15% of the revenue that they may have factored into the stock price, Congressman. Will there be oversight from Congress here?
There should be. Republicans will say one thing in private and do nothing in public, as is their norm, because this, as I said, is one, I think, a violation of Nvidia's fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, but also grossly inappropriate for the American public. Why would we be helping to equip China to surpass us in AI? We did the CHIPS Act. We made investments in the semiconductor industry, which I voted for, which was bipartisan, precisely so that we would have the lead. And this deal makes me shudder to consider what a TikTok deal might look like, what an ultimate tariff deal might look like. And again, orbiting around these considerations is who is buying the Trump coin. This is the central issue of corruption of his first year in office. More than half of his net worth is tied up in this coin. We have no idea who owns it. The people who showed up at the White House for this crypto dinner, those are just the ones who want to be seen. The Qataris, the Turks, the Venezuelans, the Chinese, they probably didn't want to be seen. We don't know who's bought him.
Okay, you've brought this up a couple times, and this is serious, Congressman. How do you find out?
Well, Senator Warren and I have asked both the SEC and the Treasury to investigate. They're not. Ultimately, this is going to have to be when Democrats take back control of the House and hopefully the Senate, and we can do subpoenas and investigations without having to be obstructed by the cowardice of congressional Republicans, because congressional Republicans have made clear that they're courtiers, they're not members of Congress, and they don't want to hold them to account for what is the most grotesque example of corruption that this president has yet exhibited. And I understand how high of a bar that is, but I'm standing by it.
Wow. So if Democrats take the House, prepare for an investigation into the Trump coin, I think is what we've learned. Congressman, we've got a minute left. Do you expect a deal with China? We've got another 90 days. Is that enough to do it?
I doubt it in 90 days. Let me say one thing more to the point, though, about this back and forth with China. What he has done is he has bundled in fentanyl, tariffs, TikTok into one giant sort of performative set of negotiations. It's a mistake. There is bipartisan support in Congress and legislation that I've helped draft with Republicans on getting much tougher on China for fentanyl. China exports about 98% of fentanyl precursors. That issue needs to be addressed right now on its own merits, because it's unacceptable that China is directing state-sponsored poisoning of the American public, 70,000 deaths every year from opioid overdoses. Tackle that. Don't tie it into TikTok and tariffs.
Oh, it was great to spend some time with you, Congressman, and I appreciate it. I hope your summer's going well. Jake Auchincloss, the Democrat from Massachusetts. We'll talk to Republican Tim Burchett of Tennessee coming up. You don't want to leave, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Glad you're with us here on the Tuesday edition. Our conversation with Congressman Tim Burchett, the Republican from Tennessee, will be with us in just a moment as we begin here on the cover of the new Business Week magazine, Bloomberg Business Week, with the Scott Bessent coin and the author of this wonderful piece that looks behind the scenes at the Treasury Department and gives us a little bit more of an idea of what makes Scott Bessent tick when it comes to policy, when it comes to his view of the economy. Dan Flatley and Eric Schatzker share the byline, and Dan's with us right now here in Washington, D.C. Congrats again on this great piece. I wonder if you learn much about Scott Bessent, the man, because this is someone we see a lot more than Treasury secretaries. When you think of Janet Yellen or recent folks who've had that job, maybe a little bit different for Tim Geithner, you go on TV maybe every 6 to 9 months or something like that. Scott Bessent is out there day after day telegraphing to the markets, taking complex questions on trade. Is that just the cadence of this White House, or is that the man who you got to spend so much time with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, he told us that he was very private before he decided to get into politics. And, you know, he didn't really... He followed the news, and he was very, and he's known, I think, to be a voracious reader. Yeah. Both a big biography. I talked to somebody who said, you know, I went into his office to talk to him about something, and I left with a brick about Charles de Gaulle. So, you know, he reads a lot. He pays attention to the media. Obviously, for the Trump administration, TV and media appearances are very important. Right. I think he has emerged kind of as a spokesperson in many respects for a lot of the economic policies that the Trump administration is undertaking. And he plays that role very well. And I think it's one that he relishes, quite frankly. But it is somewhat at odds because when you talk to him in person, he's a little bit more sort of, I wouldn't say, he's just reserved, a bit reserved, very gentlemanly, courtly. Mm-hmm. He's not really a bombastic personality, but he does go on TV a lot. And, you know, we talked a little bit about that. And it was interesting because one of the things that he told us in our interview, which unfortunately didn't make it into the piece just because there wasn't enough space for it, but he does say that he knows he has to be very careful about what he says on TV. And he really worries about that.
Audience of one?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, he's obviously wants to speak to the president's priorities, and when we know that Trump, you know, watches TV, but also he wants to be careful that, you know, if he says, I think there should be an investigation at the Fed. Well, what does he actually mean by that? It's, you know, what he says he meant is that the Fed should do an internal review of its non-monetary policies. What he said on TV a few days before that was a little bit more open to interpretation, and was reported in various places that he was calling for an investigation of the Fed. So he obviously thinks a lot about that. But what he says is that, you know, we talked a little bit about this earlier, Joe, is that he gives the president options and outcomes, and he manages the narrative. So it's part of his role, and the president has called him soothing and said he's doing a great job and all this stuff, but it's part of his role, and I think he views it as part of his job to sort of talk the president's book, and that's what he does.
Well, it's fascinating, and I want to point everyone to the Terminal and to Bloomberg Business Week. Scott Bessent on tariffs, deficits, and Trump's economic plan. Dan and Eric spent hours with him in an exclusive conversation. You'll probably learn a lot from that. Bloomberg Business Week. Many thanks, Dan Flatley, as always. Now covering the Treasury for us here in Washington. I'm Joe Mathieu, and glad you're with us on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power, with a lot to talk about here today as members of Congress enjoy their August recess. There's still a lot of news here in the nation's capital that we want to talk to Tim Burchett about, and he's with us right now, the Republican representing Tennessee's 2nd District, live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, it's great to have you. Welcome. I know that you had a bit of an injury involving a horse a couple of weeks ago, and I want to start by wishing you well. How's the recovery?
Well, it only hurts when I breathe, my heart beats, I laugh, I sneeze, or anything. If I sneeze, I'm going to have to cut off because I don't want y'all to see me cry.
Oh, God. I hope that means it's going well, Congressman. You, of course, serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'd like to start there with you at the beginning of what's going to be a very important week for geopolitics. The president is going to be sitting down, as you well know, on Friday with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, talking about the war in Ukraine. Should the United States be the host nation for someone that many see as a pariah on the world stage?
Yeah. I mean, he's a third world. I mean, to me, he's a thug. You know, the GDP of Russia is somewhere between France and Canada. I mean, you know, everybody knows his history, but we got to get him to the table. And I think I've been with President Trump many times, and nothing is by accident. And it's no accident that he's in Alaska, some of the largest oil reserves. And I believe that's part of his mission in this, is to tell Russia, y'all, your play ball are going to shut y'all down, and with the energy, because we'll have the capabilities of fluctuating markets and doing those things. And I'd rather that than American boys and girls die in a faraway land that most members of Congress, although some of them are profiting from that, literally, the war pimps and others. But I would rather them have that discussion, or whether it be an economic situation instead of American boys and girls losing their life.
Understood. With that said, should we lower our expectations on what happens Friday? Do you expect a deal, a truce to come from this? The president says he's looking to feel him out. And from what we're understanding from President Zelensky in Ukraine, he's not willing to give up any land.
No, and I understand that. But there's eventually, though, America's going to get tired. We've got over $200 billion, and Zelensky's made some comment about not sure where all the money went, half the money went or whatever. So America's growing tired of it. The world's growing tired of it. I'm tired of seeing Russians send mercenaries into another country. I'm tired of seeing people snatched off the street, Ukraine, to go fight in this war. It needs to be put to an end, and we're growing really tired of it, and it's just not happening. And I have a theory about this. I have a theory of it in America and everywhere else. People sometimes in leadership, you see it in the Middle East some too, they really don't want peace, because if they have peace, then they're not in control. They're not going to be the leaders. And we always have these wartime people, and we throw them out. Case in point in history, Winston Churchill literally saved the world. Saved the world. America got involved, of course, but he was the iron peg out there holding Europe together. And then what happened just shortly after the war was over? They voted him out of office. So there's a lot going on. And honestly, sir, financially, a lot of people, K Street lobbyists, members of Congress, people's portfolios are profiting from this. Case in point, we sent our missile defense system to Ukraine. We automatically replenished ours in a no-bid, multi-billion-dollar contract. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, from what I understand, some of them have bought that stock up to 2 weeks prior to Joe Biden issuing that executive order. It's not on Biden. It's on members of Congress that they profited from that because they own stock in those companies. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and it makes me sick to my core that young people and old people too are dying, and people are profiting from it.
Well, listen, I hear you, and this is why there's a conversation about stopping insider trading on Capitol Hill, which we could have a whole other conversation about here. I guess when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, though, do you worry that Russia is about to be rewarded for its behavior?
I do, but I think President Trump is a good deal maker. People don't like him. They like him in my district. They like him in Tennessee. They said, "Oh, you're not going to get that big, beautiful bill out." I was one of those that thought it was a little bigger and a little more beautiful than I thought it needed to be. I was the only non-Freedom Caucus member in the Roosevelt room meeting with President Trump. I was sitting 2 seats away from him. And, he went around that room and answered every dadgum question. And when he didn't know the answer, he had J.D. Vance there to answer a question. He had his economic guy. He had his military people. He had some people behind him. And he called on them to answer the question, something you don't see a lot in the media. He didn't cuss us. He didn't belittle us. 2 hours he took with us. Answered every dadgum question. And you know what? 4th of July, he was signing that bill. The other one, of course, recent memory, my friend Senator Hagerty out of Tennessee, he had the cryptocurrency bill. And he called me and said, "Tim, we're trying to get this thing done, finished up, and get on the floor, get it to the president by Friday. You think there's any chance?" And I said, I have no doubt there's a chance. I was sitting in a room. I was sitting right next to Whip Emmert between Speaker Johnson, and we were talking about it. We had some questions. I fear crypto. I fear all this AI stuff and everything. I fear that you got a bunch of men and women that still listen to 8-track tape players are going to be regulating something they don't have any idea what it's about. And the Chinese get ahead of us. And sure enough, President Trump called, started answering questions around the room. And he did it.
Fascinating.
And he got it. It was on, and guess what? It was on his desk by Friday. So you want to discount somebody, discount Tim Burchett, but don't discount Donald J. Trump, because that guy's a deal maker. I don't know. I mean, heck, he if he can handle the Teamsters in New York City, I think he can handle Vladimir Putin pretty easily.
Well, I love the story, bringing us in the room, Congressman, and I know that you're close to the president and you support him and that you respect him. You've also been very outspoken in your efforts to have the Jeffrey Epstein files released, and this is something that you'll take back up, I presume, when members return to Washington. There have been a lot of promises from the administration in different forms and from different people about releasing this information. Do you worry about what it means that it has not come out yet?
I worry that it went 4 years under the previous administration. I'm not worried about Trump being on it, because let's be honest, if Trump was on that thing, Biden would have put that stuff out. Here's my first worry. My first worry of 1,000 young girls who are now adults. Some of them have probably taken their own life that are in there, the innocent ones that were violated by these dirtbags. And anybody that did that to a kid, I hope they're going to be, I'd like to arrange for their meeting in hell pretty quick. Look, I passed some of the toughest laws in the country, ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children. I passed a death penalty for them. It was ruled unconstitutional for these child molesters. Then the state legislature brought it up. Basically the same bill, different court. It's constitutional. I even had a chemical castration bill. Everybody flipped out over it, but it turns out it probably makes a lot of sense. I've held the hands of people that have been molested. Look, I'm a Christian. I'm not a very good one. The Bible talks about how you treat the least amongst you. And on my judgment day, when God asks, how'd you treat the least amongst you? I'm going to say, dadgum, I did everything I could, Lord, because we've got to get to this thing. We've got to nail these people to the wall. We've got to eliminate this. And the number one country in the world for bringing in child porn and all this stuff, United States of America. We've got to clean our act up, brother. And I'm sick about it. We'll go after it. I'm not worried about President Trump being on it. Look, he banned Epstein 15 years ago from Mar-a-Lago, and and before he was suicided, I don't think he committed suicide. I think somebody took him out somehow, but that's just me. So, sorry, I talked too much. I'm emotional about that issue. That's a huge issue for me.
Well, you don't listen. That you just said a lot, Congressman. We only have a minute left. Are you concerned that Ghislaine Maxwell will be pardoned? No, I'm not. I don't think that's going to happen. I just can't see that. That's why I asked to subpoena her. I caused a lot of hurt feelings, but yeah,
I think we need to get her in. She might lie, she might not. She's proven lie. She'll go back to prison for a full term.
Let's talk when you get back to town, because I know this story isn't going away. Tim Burchett, Tennessee's 2nd District Republican Congressman. Thank you, as always, for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio. A lot to think about there. Following our conversations with Congressman Burchett and Congressman Auchincloss. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.